Hey guys, first of all, apologies for not making this video regarding our favorite global passive that quite literally saved Honkai Starbucks, making it the rank 1 gacha game, the best gacha game in the world, by the way. I didn't make a video about my final thoughts about Casris because I'm gonna keep it a buck. You don't need me to say that. You don't. I didn't even pull for my main account, right? So I'm pretty sure you guys already made a decision on whether or not Casris, was it gonna be a good coup for your account, for your other friend's account? Do you have the moral compass and all kind of stuff? So it is what it is. I will be resuming this series back again, this time featuring Anaxa, and I will, continue on this series with like high scene, with Cypher, etc, 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 right? So let's talk about my final thoughts about Anaxa after playing with him. I think at this point, like two and a half-ish streams, tested him out with like pretty much almost every single team comp. We've talked about his tier list placement, we've tested out in all of the endgame content, we've tried out his different Eidolons, different light cones, different builds and everything. So these are just gonna be my honest thoughts about Anaxa. Yeah, let's go in. First things first, I do want to say that me personally right now, I feel that because of what we are getting teased in a potential increment of single target combat, namely APOC Hule, as well as the upcoming Pollux, where we are starting to move away from the mod-based content a little bit, not fully, but a little bit. I would say that Anaxa is in a very, very interesting position for players to decide, is he going to be a good pull to your overall account? And I would say this is split amongst two main groups of people, right? First of which being the group of people that already owns Herta, and a group of people that don't own Herta. Everyone else, I don't think Anaxa has been that big of a concern, especially if, let's just say, you have been playing, for example, Agleia Team 1 and Casris Team 2. Or let's just say you're playing Super Raid Team 1 or My Day Team 2. Right? And for these kind of scenarios, it's a little bit difficult to say that Anaxa can bring a good upgrade investment for your accounts because he doesn't really fit into any of these teams, right? Most commonly used right now is you either run him as a D-Herda support, especially if you basically skip the Jade, or you could potentially run him as a main DPS, which you have seen from the past couple performances. I think his main DPS capabilities are definitely not the best, but definitely far away from being the worst, right? Especially if you do have Sunday, Babin, and all that stuff. Between these two group of people, the first group is gonna be those people that own the Herta, and whether or not should you guys even be pulling for Anaxa in the first place. I would say that Anaxa stands to bring about a, how like gacha companies, they would sell a problem, or rather they present a problem and they sell a solution. The thing is right now, we don't really have a problem because the endgame content, frankly speaking, whether or not you had Anaxa or don't have Anaxa for D-Herda main, you probably wouldn't feel anything. For pure vision, D-Herda is absolutely her. You definitely won't feel any difference whether or not you had Anaxa for D-Herda with pure vision. And I do think that taking a look into all three endgame content for a D-Herda team, it should be a player's focus, not just for D-Herda, for pretty much any single DPS, because you don't pull a unit just for a single game mode, right? This is honkaistarrail, this is not Epic 7, there isn't like 20 different game modes for you to play, there's only these three endgame, that's it, right? So because of that, pure vision, out the window. APOC Shadows, I feel like as long as you are going to be playing on element, right, you shouldn't really face that big of an issue when it comes to this kind of like toughness bar breaking. And on top of that, a lot of the APOC Shadows, it is no longer a very simple matter of, okay, you deal toughness bar damage, you'll break the guy faster, right? We have seen this from the first half of APOC as well as the second half of APOC. The bugs as well as Hule, their toughness bar, they break from interacting with the mechanics, such as exploding the mobs for both the bug as well as Hule, right? So for these reasons, even though Anaxa himself, he can help you implant weakness, he can deal very good amount of toughness bar damage because he is going to be a bounce targeting sub DPS or a DPS. If he can't interact with the mechanics, you might start to feel not that comfortable playing with him. And I feel like this is a very important thing to consider because what was the last time somebody was like, oh my god, this archetype is gonna fucking be absolutely insane in APOC Shadows? Super Break. Right? Super Break was the APOC Shadow archetype team comp for everyone, right? Because this team comp, it was revolving around bringing the enemy as fast as possible. And if you had the access to the Super Raid DPS as well as your Ramen and all that kind of stuff, you had a chance to basically deal the highest possible performance out of every single other team, right? The easiest to clear, the fastest to clear, one of the fastest to clear, very excited with player base. But fast forward nowadays, I'm not sure if this video is going to be out before the tier list. I hope it is after, it is no longer just a perspective of whether or not you can break the enemies as fast as possible using your raw units kit anymore, right? It's not just about implanting fire weakness. It is not just about ignoring toughness bar damage. It is legit about how can you interact with the boss's mechanics. So for example, Firefly, right? You want to use Firefly against Hule. Hule is literally fire weak. But if you can't even deal toughness bar damage to the Hule, you have to one by one individually snipe the little wolves in order to bring down his toughness bar level, right? Maybe it might not be an issue. You can still clear. But I don't think anyone would disagree with me to say that it is nowhere near as the prime of what they were back then, right? And I feel that this is also an interesting point of contention when it comes to should you be pulling for Anaxa for your Dihera mains if you want to say have a vertical upgrade to, in this case, Epoch Shadows, because he's absolutely going to be a good investment for Epoch Shadows, since for your Dihera, you are basically stuck with either Jade, Saval, Baby Herda, or Argenti. And none of these four really deal as much toughness bar damage on paper as compared to Anaxa. But if we see an environment where you're gonna see like the mobs, right? If the mobs can die faster if you were running Jade, because Jade technically deals more AoE damage than Anaxa, can you really say with confidence that Anaxa is gonna be better or worse than Jade? I'll do that after your food for thought. So that is gonna be that. And then lastly, for Memory of Chaos, I do believe that you have been very, very comfortable in looking at the performances that Dihera has been performing for the past couple of seasons, right? Before this, it was a Nikador patch, and then we have like the True Swarm, and then now we have this thing. All right, all the kind of stuff. Dihera has been performing exceptionally well, and with or without Anaxa, I feel that this is still ultimately gonna be very similar to Epoch, where it depends on the environment, depends on the enemy. So right now, Flame Weaver, perfect for Dihera, right? Fire targeting almost every single time, and then if you were to slam in Anaxa, when the clones die, he himself can deal a substantial amount of single target damage to the Flame Weaver, which sometimes may be against his intended purpose, because for the second phase of Flame Weaver, if you break the Flame Weaver too fast, you can't kill the clones, which is technically like a damage drop-off. So it's not exactly to say whether or not Anaxa is gonna be a absolute certainty of an upgrade for your Dihera teams for all these kind of 3 engines. I'm basically just giving you guys some potential food for thoughts before you guys say, okay, yep, he's gonna be worth it, right? So always like to think about this kind of like possible scenarios, especially since we know the next one is gonna be Higher Scene as well as Cypher, and because of what we have been seeing in the teaser for Epoch Shadows, the 1v1 from Hule, it's not a very straightforward answer as to whether or not he's a must pull or a must skip, right? So those are gonna be for Dihera owners, whether or not you should be considered pulling for Anaxa. Quick little touch up, should you be pulling for Anaxa, especially if you have Jade? I can't make a decision for you, but if I was a free-to-play player and if I already owned Jade, I probably wouldn't get Anaxa right now anyways, right? Especially since free-to-plays, they are very limited in resources, and even though with me Anaxa doesn't really need a station like code, if I already have a unit that is a teammate to Dihera, me pulling for Anaxa means me benching potentially 70 pulls, which I've already spent for a premium unit. So I want to wait for a little bit more to see if the overall team for my Dihera as a free-to-play can keep up with the content that's going to be getting progressively moving away from AoE content, or just getting progressively more difficult in the forms of HP inflation, right? So that's going to be my thoughts on what I should do. And now we're going to go into the second group of people, which is going to be the people that you guys skipped Dihera, but you're thinking about pulling for Anaxa anyways. Either be it he's going to be your main DPS as an Erudition main DPS, you can run him Sunday, or you want to run him as like a secondary support for all these other team comps. For example, as you can see from a very normal Anaxa showcase, where I ran him as a super Anaxa, right? Super Anaxa, ran as like an Aircron support, we ran with like a main DPS with a Jade supporting Anaxa instead of Dihera. And I think there are a lot of different ways that people can potentially use him in. For this group of people, I would feel that Anaxa, he reminds me of a little bit of like Jiao Qiu back in the days, where Jiao Qiu, technically you can run him as a Yun Li support. You technically can run him as an Argenti support. But at the end of the day, he is extremely synergistic with Aircron. Far better than any of the others. So for example, if you want to run like a super break Anaxa, you are basically asking yourself, can Anaxa deal more damage than your old super break DPSs like your Reba, Firefly, or even Lingsha, right? That's example 1. Or example 2, if you want to run Anaxa as a main DPS, do you think Anaxa can output more damage, or is like a considerable upgrade compared to the main DPS team that you guys used back in the days. So for example, if you have already pulled for Aglea, or even if you pulled for Jingyuan back then, and you're running like Sunday plus Babin plus Hue Hue, which is a very, very synergistic team comp, if you were to slap on Anaxa over Jingyuan or Aglea, do you think you can outperform by a degree that is gonna be substantial enough for your account as a main DPS investment, right? And then last camp, which is gonna be running Anaxa as an Aircron support, right? We're running him as an Aircron support. First of all, I don't think he's gonna be replacing Jiao Qiu. Second of all, even though he might be able to replace that slot 3, especially if you have an E2 Aircron, because he technically does provide quite a decent chunk of debuffs, right? Quite a decent chunk. But we are gonna be getting Cypher, and Cypher is a Nihility unit. I don't know what Cypher's kit is, but if Cypher is gonna be a Nihility class unit that can also synergize with Aircron, do you think getting an Anaxa right now in this juncture is gonna be worth it over getting a potential dedicated Nihility slot, right? So, I mean, I don't want to say don't pull, but like, I feel like with all of these things, even though he can work in this kind of like other scenarios, it almost always feels like there's someone that is better at a job than him in that specific slot. Not to say that he is bad at his job, but it's more like there are people that are even more qualified than him in that position, right? It's just like in the real world, right? Nobody are saying that you're a bad employee, right? You're probably very good, you're probably very hardworking. But in the real world, if someone else can do your job even better than you, that guy is probably getting hired. Because in Honkai Starbucks, there are only 4 team slots, and if you can't get hired, one bomb, it is what it is, right? So that is pretty much it for the people that are thinking about putting if you do not have a D card up, right? So with that, I do want to come on to sort of like another point of discussion, which is his items, his light cones. So this is after, like, should you even be putting him in the first one? So this one is you really decided to pull, right? Do I think it's going to be worth it to go for vertical investments? So for example, specifically his signature light cone, which we are going to be changing this into this right here, right? His signature light cone. Right, his signature icon over here, as well as his Eidolons. Now, me personally, I think Anaxa as a standalone E0 Ezreal is fantastic, right? Because we do have access to the Great Cosmic Enterprise, which is a pretty decent alternative. And even though he cannot maintain a guaranteed 2-turn ultimate without running an energy regeneration rope, because this signature icon, it gives him this 10 energy, which means that you fill the 140 energy gap even while casting 2 skills with no RNG from getting hit or as well as killing the enemies. But despite that, I feel that it's not the end of the world if you just change out into the Great Cosmic Enterprise and then just run an energy regeneration rope, because that can also guarantee you getting a 2-turn ultimate. And at the end of the day, if you are going to be thinking about running him as a sub DPS, then his damage might still be able to be mitigated a little bit more, because I do believe that majority would still come from D-Herda, and Anaxa is there for us to gain more charges, more stacks, even though his personal damage is still going to be pretty substantial, such as for example Tribi, right? Tribi also deals a considerable of damage by herself, especially from all the follow-up attacks from all of the ultimates, but it is by no means where she's like a main DPS Tribi. Even though technically we have tried before and it sort of works with like all of the Honkai support rail, but my point digress, right? So that's gonna be that. Another point to note is basically if you were to not run him as a sub DPS, you want to run him as a main DPS with a main DPS build, I would say even if you do not have his signature light cone, chances are you're probably killing something as a main DPS at Anaxa. Right? You're probably going to be killing the most, because who else is going to be there killing? It's not going to be Hue Hue. Is Hue going to steal a kill? Is Sunday going to steal a kill? Is Babin going to steal a kill? Probably not, right? So most of the energy is still going to be funneling back into your main DPS and Anaxa. And at that point, you also have an access to the Great Cosmic Enterprise, which is a very, very close damage substitute, because that light cone is specifically designed to give your Anaxa more damage, right? So because of that, you can still technically still run Anaxa with an attack rope as a main DPS, and he, in my opinion, I think he's still going to be able to perform getting a 2-turn ultimate, right? Aside from this light cone, his Eidolons, you can take a look at the video, which is going to be our $1 versus $2,000 Anaxa. I would say that the most impactful one is going to be this thing over here. This res down, I think we tested it. It was like what, a final damage increase multiplier of like almost, we did like 25 or like 30% higher damage per skill bounce from the E2. And then at the E6, it doubled. Even though this thing is like 130% of the original damage, it literally doubled. Right, we went from I believe like a 180k or like a 200k bullet in a single skill to 400k, right, in the 1 versus 2000. So if you're a mega whale, don't let me stop you, right? If you want to pull, I think it is pretty satisfying, right? He's making Kakyoin and Roller Splash, very, very nice. If you are a dolphin thinking about getting a E2 Anaxa, I would say that E2 Anaxa at this point, you're essentially, it's good, right? It's good. You have the res down. It is like the true res down, such as, for example, Silver Wolf. But this E2 Anaxa is also at the expense of a potential E2 unit that you could have been investing in outside of Anaxa. For example, E2 D-Herda. right? It could be E2 D-Herda, it could be your E2 Bubbin, it could be like an E1 Bubbin plus an E1 Chibi, it could be a E2 Casuals, it could be a lot of these different Eidolons that I would say has a greater degree of impact in the overall content that we are facing than a E2 Anaxa. Especially when it comes to like main DPSs like E2 Herda as well as E2 Casuals, these two Eidolons are absolutely insane. It literally feels like you're playing a different unit. Whereas for E2 and Anaxa, you still play almost exactly the same. You basically just do a little bit more damage. So at the end of the day, it is always going to be an opportunity cost. And for players that did not pull for... Okay, I'll start with D, right? For players that actually put Anaxa for D-Herda, if you're thinking about putting an E2 Anaxa as a vertical upgrade for D-Herda, I would personally say that if you're going to be upgrading D-Herda, you might as well take the E2 Herda. Because E2 Herda is honestly very, very, very strong. And on the flip side, if you didn't pull for D-Herda, right, you want to play Anaxa as a main DPS, chances are, this same amount of E2 Anaxa, you're probably just better off getting an E1 Sunday and an E1 Chibi. Right, and that would have allowed you to still get a very, very good vertical investment for this Anaxa main DPS team, while still allowing your D supports to perform even better with other DPSs that you might play in the future, right? So that is gonna be my personal opinion based on the light cone as well as the Eidolon. And now with that, we can sort of just come towards the final portion of the video, which is what do I feel about Anaxa going forward, especially after looking at how the roster of 3.0 has been stacking up, as well as going forward, we are going to be getting Fate Collab, you know, Hyacinth, Cypher, what the future is going to be holding for this specific unit. I would say that Anaxa as a unit is probably gonna be less universal than what people think he's gonna be, right? Because one of the biggest things that I've been seeing online is basically he's a super universal support, right? Because he has a free 7 weakness imaginary implant, which basically means you can technically slap him onto any team comp, and those team comps can just deal with the enemies because you are going to be implanting weakness. I do feel that this particular point about his overall like general usage is a little bit overblown, because first of all, implanting weakness is not the same as Silver Wolf, right? He doesn't get the res down from Silver Wolf, so you're literally just there to deal toughness bar damage. Second of all, if you want to talk about a specific slot dedicated to D-Herda, I do feel there might be a situation where I want to take a look at for example, Aggron, right? Aggron, back in those days, we had Pella and Silver Wolf. And then after a while, we had a unit called Jiao Qiu. Now, did we replace Silver Wolf or did we replace Pella? Yeah, and then now that we're going to be getting a buff from Silver Wolf, maybe a buffed Silver Wolf could also potentially offer a similar level of performance, because Silver Wolf is going to be the OG weakness implanter that also has access to her rest down. So I'm not even going to lie, Anaxa as a unit, his biggest competition now might potentially be a reworked buffed Silver Wolf, because both of them sort of fills this like alleged general niche of implanting weakness on target. Except that for Silver Wolf, she applies a rest down on top of that while providing, technically speaking, a much higher level of defense reduction. And she is not bound by the fact that you need to slap her on with an erudition unit, or you can, in this case, you can run it as a Harmony Hybrid Carry DPS. But I would say that, I can't even believe I'm saying this, if reworked Silver Wolf turns out to be a strong powerhouse, I would be a little bit worried for Anaxa. Right, maybe for D-Herda vertical investments, I think he's still going to be completely fine, because Silver Wolf is not erudition, right? And you need the erudition for D-Herda. I think it's going to be fine. But if you're going to be talking about like general usage for different flexibility, implanting weakness, toughness bar reduction, because let's be honest, Silver Wolf back in those days for Epoch Shadows, she also dealt very, very high toughness bar damage. Or are we just going to pretend that didn't happen, right? Because the ultimate, it was very easily a 2-turn rotation, especially if you have access to the tutorial icon, which everybody has now. Even faster if you get an E1 Silver Wolf, which is, I would say, it's still a pretty decent item value, because you do get access to the potential even 1-turn ultimates on ERO, right? Second of all, she also helped you implant the weakness for your Epoch Shadows. So for a use like Anaxa, which is just implanting weakness, Silver Wolf has a rest down, has a defense down, has a toughness bar, and at this point, I feel like this video is getting a little bit off track, but the bottom line is basically, if Silver Wolf was to start performing very well, I think the Anaxa owners will start to find the most value if you dedicate him towards the slot that's going to be with pairing with like D-Herda, right? That is pretty much going to be my overall honest thoughts about Anaxa. It might sound a little bit harsh. It might sound like I fucking hate this guy because he's like a man, or like, you know, everybody should be skipping him. But I think that going forward, I also want to take a little bit more of maybe a more stringent look towards Honkai Starbucks in general, because I am a little bit more cynical about the game now, since, Epic 7 and everything, right? So I want to review this at a little bit more of a broader perspective, and I do feel that by the pace of which we're getting a lot of these very, very good version 3 units, version 3 synergies, HP, DPS archetypes, Barbin archetypes, potentially even DOT could come back, the Violent DOT girl, Fate collapse. I feel like the choices for racking up your units and vertical investments in HSR is going to be quite important, right? So just want to give you guys some food for thought, especially for people that are a little bit more hesitant in pooling. To summarize everything, my free-to-play account, I can't speak for myself because, I have an account that basically owns every single unit. My free-to-play account pooled for Anaxa. My Bob account has an E0L0 Herta. He pulled for an E0L0 Anaxa. And his second team is running Castries with a Lucky Temple Mighty. So that's what my free-to-play account did. And maybe you could or could not take that with a consideration, right? So with that, we have come to the end of today's content. Word of the day is going to be Hail Epics. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, all the best. See you guys next time. Take care.